Welcome all. My name is Carly Rice. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator here on the Twin Cities campus. If this is your first time joining, this is our Sustainability Coffee Chat series. We have informal discussions about a variety of sustainability topics. Today being connections between sustainability and art, and a project that was implemented on the West Bank to attempt to mitigate bird strikes. Um, so we'll hear from two, maybe three wonderful speakers on that. This is our last chat of the spring semester, so just kind of keep an eye out for when we get back going with this in the fall semester. So with that, so these are our speakers today. We're not sure if Jolie is joining us. Jolie's a student, busy time of year. We'll see. But we do have Christine Baeumler from the art department, and we have Erin Jordahl. Um, and they are going to speak to us about this bird mitigation project, as I mentioned. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up their slides. And if each of you could just start with like a brief introduction of yourselves, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Erin, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Erin Jordahl, and I guess my involvement with this project, I'm obviously not your, traditional student. I audited Chris's class in the fall, the art and ecology class, and this project grew out of that class. So I am actually a lawyer. I've done a whole lot of things over a whole lot of years. And right now I'm working on setting up an eco art center in White Bear Lake. And that's probably enough about me right now.
Great. Thanks, Erin. I just want to thank the sustainability group here for having us this morning. We're really so pleased to be able to share this project, but also to learn from Andrew and others. My name is Chris Baumler. I am a professor in the Department of Art and currently also the chair of the department. I'm also an environmental artist, and I teach courses in art and ecology and art and climate change. And so this, as Erin mentioned, was the outcome of a group project by Erin and Jolie as a final project where students are asked to, think about a issue that they care deeply about, an environmental issue, and then find some way through an artistic approach to intervene or address that issue. So that's um, all I think I need to say about me, but I think Erin is going to go ahead and tell you a little bit more about the origin story and some of the research that she and Jolie did to get to the point of this installation.
Yeah, so I guess I would also like to loop Andrew into this because I think having had a conversation with him, he's kind of the expert in the science and methodology of trying to prevent these bird strikes. But Jolie and I started working on this last fall, late fall, and the idea of it was to try and prevent bird strikes in the skyway between the art buildings. And we did a bunch of research and discovered that really the ultimate solution, according to the science of it, and correct me anytime I'm wrong, Andrew, but the long-term solution is really something on the exterior of the building, because it's there's all kinds of ways of doing it, but by doing that, you allow the birds to see that, hey, this isn't a place that I want to fly through. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. But that would require a whole lot of things to happen, namely big equipment coming to the exterior of the skyway, dealing with all the university bureaucracy and funding and all that stuff. Meanwhile, birds are hitting the skyway and falling and getting hurt and dying. So what Jolie and I tried to come up with was something that would be kind of a temporary measure, something that could be put in place before migration this spring, and hope that it would have some effect. And so we tested different materials. So Jolie was the legs. She would run downstairs and I would hold things up in the skyway and we would try different materials to see what would interrupt the vision that a bird might see on the outside. And so playing around with that, we sort of by happenstance or synchronicity or whatever, there was a graduate student who had an installation not far from the Skyway. And there were tinsel curtains that were, the thing that was shaping the installation. And so I thought, geez, that might work. So we tried some tinsel. We didn't have tinsel curtains, but we tried some, reflective paper, basically. And that seemed to be the best thing we could find, better than any kind of solid thing. It interrupted the visual space there. And so, I ordered some curtains, some tinsel curtains. You can get them on Amazon. They're not that expensive. And we tried it. And so you see the slide that Chris has put out there. It's kind of a magical space, actually, more so even than we had envisioned. The other surprising thing to me was that it really, because there's air moving in the space, it kind of fluctuates, and so it doesn't really totally obstruct the view either outside. And so I think that's a positive. Now, whether it works or not, fingers crossed. It was intended as a temporary measure to try and do something in the interim before long-term solutions could be made. And in that process, we learned about the Stop the Thud project. And so, Andrew, if you want to say a few things about that, I've been very impressed with the website, with all the background work and all of the documenting of how significant a problem it is on campus. So, yes, that's our project. And I am just very excited because I think collaboration between different disciplines is really where a lot of headway can be made on all kinds of fronts. So,
I'd just like to add one other thing before we move to Andrew, and that is the collaboration, not only between the ideas of art and science, but also between our class and the Building, Space, and Sustainability Committee. So we had a very supportive committee led by Chosani Dean and our facilities manager, Jim Gubernick. We invested some funds from the art department to pay for which was not very expensive, but to pay for all the tinsel, and we had assistance from them as well. I was trying to upload a video, which I wasn't able to embed in the PowerPoint, but there's a little video, and if I can share it, I will. But it really captures the kind of magical sense of walking through that space. And then we do have a QR code so people can understand what's actually going on beyond just having an artistic experience. And I see also that Jolie has joined us as well, the other artist on the project.
Yeah, I could not for the life of me find the Zoom link. There goes my poster. Which is kind of funny because I am the undergraduate student. I feel like that's our thing is Zoom calls, but yes, hello. Yeah, it does look very magical in there. I have a class in Regis on Mondays and Wednesdays, and it's fun because some of my classmates saw me in there putting the things up, and so they kind of know. But then it's also fun to if we're walking between buildings to watch people like put their hands up against it like it's like a water feature or something and walk through it. And it's definitely like a magical space, but also it was definitely a feat to try and figure out what was actually going to work for being able to see it from the outside, because part of the challenge was the background, I guess you could call it, of the Skyway changed colors because sometimes there was building behind it and sometimes there was sky. And so it was definitely kind of a happy circumstance that the graduate students' work was right next to the Skyway. And Erin saw it and was like, I wonder if this would work. And I'm glad we found a temporary solution that seems like it will work. I don't know if we have any updates on if there have been any bird strikes recently, but yeah.
Thank you, Jolie. Andrew, we
Yeah, so I can jump in here. I'll introduce myself. My name's Andrew Hallberg. I'm a PhD candidate in the Conservation Sciences graduate program at the U. I am in my fifth year of my PhD, and my research at the U has all been focused on this issue of bird building collisions. And so my big project on campus is this thing called Stop the Thud, which I'll get into in a second here. But yeah, Stop the Thud is a sort of collaboration with my program, the College of it's CFANS, and then it's the Department of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Science, and also with the Sustainability Office at the U. So we've been kind of working on this project together for the last 4 years. So, Carly, I'll have you go to the next slide here. So, I started Stop the Thud in 2021. And the sort of crux of the project is to sort of figure out how we can ameliorate bird strikes on campus by leveraging sort of the campus community and the folks who are around the buildings the most. So, really, what this gets at the heart at is there's a disconnect between identifying collisions and then mitigating collisions. So we've all seen birds that hit windows, and then we have a sort of innate sense of where collisions are happening, but then there's a disconnect or a gap between knowing that sort of where the collisions are a problem and then actually getting mitigation put on those windows. And so, Carly, have we move to the next one here? There's a whole bunch of reasons for that disconnect, including things like limited research resources, funding for mitigation, just lack of public awareness of the issue, and then also lack of, stakeholder buy-in for folks who are making the decisions to actually put mitigations in place. And so what we envisioned was that Stop the Thud would be a way of sort of bridging that gap by having community members being the ones to sort of collect the data, know where these sort of collisions are happening, and also, a way of generating collision data quickly and efficiently. And so you can sort of bypass some of these resource issues and funding issues and really, quickly get data on where mitigation would be most effective. And also there's a scientific, aspect of this as well. With all of this data, we're getting a better sense of where collisions are happening, why they're happening, what we can do to sort of effectively prevent them. All right, so you can advance to the next one here. Yeah, so Stop the Thud, sort of bridging that gap. Okay, so here's how it works. Everything sort of operates on a QR code system or a sort of online system. And so I have an online form. It's kind of like a really souped up Google form where you can enter in data on where you found the bird. It has a built-in map feature, so you can drop a pin exactly where you are. And if you're using your phone, most of the time, the phone will just automatically know that location for you and it'll drop a pin. And so what I can do is just get all of this information about where the collisions are happening. I have folks snap photos of the birds they're finding so that we can identify the species. And so we get a lot of really good information from a form that takes about 1 or 2 minutes to complete. And everything is publicly available, so you can find the QR code. If you know about Stop the Thud, you can just Google it and it'll take you to the form. There's ways of storing the form on your phone if you're a repeat user of the product. So, anyways, through those years, we've sort of collected this data, and this is kind of what it looks like on my end. Is I have all of these dots with all of that information sort of contained within. So I have, time, location, species identification. I have, photos of the facades that they were hitting. And so what all of this has led to, I'll have you advance to the next one. Since March of 2021, we've collected, 1,645 reports of birds that we know struck buildings on campus. Not all of those birds died. The vast majority have, but there are some that are injured and then flew off later. But that's from March 2021 to January 2025. I have a really cool website that I created for the project where you can sort of explore this data further. So there's maps that you can sort of click through and you can see all of the individualized reports. You can click on the dots to see, the data that's contained within, so you can see the species and when the collision was reported. Anyways, I have a link to that website later in the presentation if you want to check that out later, but I won't get in too deep into the sort of data aspect of it yet. All right, I'll have you click to the next one. So why do collisions occur? Um, the answer is that birds can't perceive glass. And to be honest, humans have a hard time perceiving glass too sometimes. It's not just a bird issue. But, evolutionarily speaking, windows are a really novel threat to birds, and they don't have the adaptations to perceive glass and understand that it's not something that they can just fly through or fly into. So that's the main problem is they just don't have the capacity to understand what glass is. And there's two sort of main problems with glass. One is reflectance and the other is translucence. So if you look at the picture in the bottom left, that is a building on campus that is our kind of biggest collision culprit. This is the Cancer and Cardiovascular Research Building. And if you see that big glass sort of ellipse on the front is just perfectly reflecting the sky. And so the bird sees that reflection, doesn't understand that it's a reflection, flies into it, thinking that it's just more sky, or maybe it's seeing a tree reflected in that sort of window space, flies into it, thinking that it's something it can land on. So that's the bigger issue. Most of the time, the buildings that we see in the collisions we sort of experience are because of this reflectance issue. The windows are just reflecting the surroundings around it, and the bird doesn't understand that's a reflection. But the other issue is that, glass is transparent, right? It's translucent, so we can see outside of it. That's why we use it as windows. And in certain instances, we have spaces on campus where you can see straight through, two sort of panes of glass. So we live in Minnesota. We have lots of skyways to get us to and from places in the cold winter without having to step outside. But those skyways, um, are an example of this translucence problem where the bird can't perceive that there's two, panes of glass. It tries to fly through, it hits the window. So if you click to the next slide, one of the bigger sort of problem areas on campus where we see this is this linkage between, I think it's Jackson and Hasselmo Hall on East Bank. And this particular skyway attracts a lot of pigeon collisions. And when pigeons collide with windows, they have a little pigment, or it's not a pigment, it's when their down feathers are molted, they sort of disintegrate. And so when pigeons especially hit windows, they leave this residue. And so you can sort of see the imprint of the collisions when they occur. This doesn't happen with most birds, but pigeons, this happens pretty prevalently. So at this specific linkage, you can see the imprints of the pigeons that are hitting the skyway, thinking that they can sort of fly right through it. So that's the big issue. There's transparence, translucence, and there's also reflectance. In skyways, like the one between Regis, it's going to be that sort of translucence issue. That's the problem. But we also have a suite of sort of mitigation tools that we can implement to, prevent collisions. So if you go to the next slide, the gold standard of sort of mitigation are these sort of fritted or, patterned glass assemblages. Sometimes, glass that's installed on a building will have you can install glass that already has this sort of fritted pattern in place. So that's what we're seeing on the left here. This is Brunix Hall on East Bank, right along the river. This building was constructed with this glass already in place. And sort of the gold standard for preventing almost all collisions is to have these patterns in like a 2-inch by 2-inch arrangement or closer. And that prevents almost all collisions. this is a building that we often survey, and we almost never find collisions there. Actually, I've never found a collision there. And so this sort of pattern is really good at breaking up the glass space so that birds can perceive that it's a solid object and not something that they can fly through. But there's also really cool examples of, creative ways to sort of use this patterning. So this is at the Raptor Center. This is not something that was installed with the building. This is like a retrofit film that was applied to the exterior of the glass. But instead of just sort of dots, they've used these really cool flying bird silhouettes. And again, they're in this sort of patterning of 2 inch by 2 inch. So it's covering up the space so that birds, again, are perceiving it as a solid object, not as something that they can fly through, but it's doing it in a really interesting way that is appropriate for the Raptor Center because now you have all these raptor silhouettes. So I really like that as a really interesting visual way of, putting in these mitigations. Um, there are also sort of, I like to call these the DIY solutions. And so here's a couple examples of those on campus. The one on the left is between two residential buildings or dorms on West Bank. And these are just cords that are hung, I think, on the interior of the building. And so it's breaking up the visual space. I think, as Erin alluded to earlier, there is research that the most effective mitigations are to the exterior of the glass. So in order for mitigations to be effective, they need to be on the outside of a glass surface to sort of break up the visual space. What I will say is I think that is more important in instances where reflectance is the issue. So when, the sky or trees are being reflected in the windows, putting visual markers on the exterior of the glass is really the only way to sort of break up that reflectance. In instances of translucence like this, where the birds are seeing through, I actually think the interior placement of cords or stickers or the tinsel that we've seen from this other Regis project might actually be effective at preventing some of these collisions because it's obstructing that sort of tunnel view where birds think they can fly through. Now you're sort of getting some of that visual obstruction, so they might be able to perceive that better. To my knowledge, there's no research sort of looking at that particular issue, so it'll be really interesting to see how effective the Regis sort of mitigation is going to be at preventing collisions. But anyways, here's a couple examples of sort of DIY solutions. We have cords and we have tape. And then I have one more sort of example here, and this one's my favorite one on campus. And maybe I doubled. Can you go to the next one, Carly? Yeah. So this is a link between Skoke Hall and Green Hall on the St. Paul campus. And what was applied here was a film to the exterior of the glass linkage there. And it is a sort of a woodland scene, which is like a really cool and interesting way to apply this mitigation. This happened before my time at the U, so I was not involved with this project necessarily. But I think what happened is they had a contest to design the sort of pattern to go on the exterior of this linkage. And this sort of woodland scene won. And it's really striking and really, really cool. I don't know if you can see, but there's like birds in there, a lot of birch trees. I have a sort of close up over here so you can see what's happening. There's just lots of little perforations in that film so that you can see out from the inside. And if you go to the next slide, you can sort of see what that looks like from the interior. Oh, yeah, can we move to the next? Yeah, there we go. So really close up, that's what's happening. And then when you step back, you're able to see outside pretty clearly. If anything, it's just a little bit darker inside, but you can almost see unobstructed if you step back far enough from the window. So a really, really cool application of a mitigation on campus. And I think it's this really good example of how mitigations and the sort of window collision issue can be sort of interdisciplinary and involve a lot of different parties to make something that's really striking and I think like enhances the sort of beauty of the campus buildings and also serves an important function in, preventing collisions from occurring. So that's what I have for you today. Just some examples of what's happened on campus and a little bit of a background to what I've been doing with Stop the Thud. That top link there will lead you to the website if you want to sort of explore my data a little bit more and see what we've been doing with Stop the Thud. So I will turn it over to, anyone else? Yep,
Andrew,
that's the
just
site.
a quick question. Um, the the application that you were just speaking about, do
Yeah,
you know, has it been completely effective? I
yeah, I've
mean,
never found a bird there. And I mean it is like from the outside, it covers the totality of the window. So it's almost like a wall. I would, yeah, birds are not going to fly into that.
do you have any knowledge of the product that was used or the process for creating it, anything like that? Because it really is beautiful. I mean, and when you see it from the inside, it's also very cool that as you step back, it's really not a visual impairment.
Yeah. There's like a little info placard on the inside. Here, I have a photo of it. I can drop it in the chat. So there is some information about the project and who was involved in it. I don't know if they used, or I don't know if there's any information about the specific product that they used, but I'll find that for you and I'll get it to you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Andrew, could I also thank you? That was a fantastic presentation. And
Yeah.
so happy to learn
Absolutely.
more about your work. Um, have you been collaborating with other institutions on campus or the Raptor Center or any other groups that are trying to institutionalize this a little bit more as an approach?
Not really. It's something that I would love to start doing more of. Again, I think like the more I've been sort of working with this project, the more it's become clear to me that the best way to institute sort of change on campus or these sort of mitigations is to really collaborate with as many folks as possible and get as many ideas generated and you know people involved. And so I really love what you guys are doing with Regis. I mean, I think it's a perfect application of using all of these sort of tools that we have at our disposal to ameliorate the issue. And so finding really creative solutions to prevent collisions, I think that's going to be the path forward. I mean, to be frank, it's really, really expensive to implement mitigations on Windows. We got pretty far down the path to implement mitigations at our one of our worst collision culprits, and we just got priced out of doing it. It was just far too expensive to move forward with that project. And so I think the way to do it is going to be to find creative ways to work with folks and find creative solutions to mitigate things. And maybe we don't focus on some of the big facades, but finding skyways that we can sort of target or things like that. I think that's going to be an effective way forward to sort of prevent some of the collisions on campus.
Thank you. I know that Jolie joined us a little bit late, but I just wonder, Jolie, if you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you study and why you decided to, you know, address this issue in your project with Erin.
No, absolutely. My name is Jolie. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. I'm in CLA. I don't currently have a major. I'm working on making one, probably focused in wildlife management in captivity, and also conservation. I want to do conservation education in the future. I love birds. I've always loved animals, but in my senior year of high school, I had a teacher who we did a birding unit with, and it just it just became meaningful, and I just find so much joy in birds. Um, my roommates are always getting facts, and if we're outside and I hear a bird, I'm like, what bird is that? And I start quizzing them. But I actually this summer had an experience with bird strikes. I worked at a humane society in Madison as a summer camp counselor for Camp Paw Print. And in the early morning when I was setting up on two separate occasions, I heard and found birds that had hit a window. Um, One was I was setting up, I heard a thunk, and I went outside, and in the bushes there was a hairy woodpecker. And one thing that was really lucky for the bird is that this humane society, which has like cats and dogs that go up for adoption and stuff, is that they also have a wildlife center 100 feet away. And so I got in contact with someone down the hall because I was setting up for summer camp, so I couldn't go bring it in myself, but it was a very fortunate place for a bird to hit a window. Granted, survival rates are not great, but I think that was kind of best case solution. Another time, there was a downy woodpecker that was hanging on to the exterior and very obviously had a broken wing. Um, so I kind of started thinking about that when our final project came up in the art and ecology class. I started thinking about pigeons. Um, I'm a big podcast listener, and I had listened to an entire podcast and more about pigeons, and people hate them. We see the like the stakes that are on the exterior buildings to prevent pigeons from living there and ultimately pooping there, because it does degrade materials. But it's just it was interesting to me because it's kind of a not their fault situation where they are feral because they were a domesticated species that we just abandoned. And so I started thinking about that. And then I don't totally remember how, oh, it was Chris brought up the fact that there was a little bit of that there were bird strikes happening in the Regis Skyway, and that there might be a project and some funding to go towards preventing that. And Erin and I kind of had already discussed bird things for our project, and we went for it. One of the things that I've been very slowly working on, as this semester has been far more chaotic than the last, is that I have been working on a website that is still definitely under construction. I do have a link to it. The name is not official. It's just something we said in passing, winging it, because we were talking about just trying to get something up. We're like, we're just winging it. And Erin was like, you had it. So that's why it's titled that. I had to put something down. But there are some resources there with prevention, like there's UV products and just regular exterior applications. There's also information about bird safe buildings and planning, and a document by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services that gives information about how effective certain applications are and other mitigation things. So it's one of the things I've been very slowly working on. Yeah, I see a question in the chat. I don't know if it's for me.
Maybe Andrew.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably a more Andrew
Thank you,
question.
Jolie, though. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jolie. Yes, great chat or great question for Andrew here. So John asks, one, have there been complaints for bird mortality at particular locations on campus that reoccur seasonally? I will say yes, but I'll let Andrew respond further. And two, are particular species most susceptible collisions at different window heights? I'm also thinking yes, but again, we'll let Andrew expand on that.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. So the seasonality piece is really interesting. So essentially, most of the collisions that we find and document are migratory birds, and it's mostly warblers and sparrows. So there's something to birds that migrate from Central and South America to Canada, like the northern forests of Canada and parts of the United States too. But they are, making these journeys twice yearly, right? And on those journeys, they're coming through cities, and that's when we see a lot of the collisions occurring. And the fact is, these birds are not as adapted to city life as the birds that stick around year round. So if you think of cardinals and blue jays and chickadees, the birds that we see all the time, we don't see them as collision victims very often relative to how many that there are. And I think they're probably a little bit more urban adapted than these migratory birds. So warblers and sparrows, they're going through cities, they're unfamiliar with them. We see them colliding with buildings a lot more often. And the sort of months that we see those most intensely are late April into May, and then also September to October. Those are kind of our main, migratory periods where we experience the most collisions. And even within that, we see a lot more collisions in the fall than we do in the spring. And the sort of thinking there is that in the fall, you have newly hatched birds making a migratory journey for the first time. And again, they might just be a little bit more naive, a little bit less adapted to urban areas or don't have the experience of going through urban areas. And so we think we see a lot more collisions because there's a lot of birds flying for the first time, hitting buildings. So that's the sort of seasonal thing. I mean, we see patterns at the same buildings more or less every year. We the buildings that we see that are our biggest sort of collision victims one year, or biggest collision culprits one year, will carry over to be the biggest collision culprits the next year as well. Um, I think the issue of window heights and direction is really interesting, and it's something that, I'm using my data to sort of dig into a little bit more. So I guess I don't have a definitive answer for you yet, but the interesting thing about height is that it's a really tough thing to pin down if window height has any bearing on collisions. The problem is all of the data we gather from collisions comes from birds that we find on the ground. And so we don't really know where that bird hit the window, when it hit the window, during the sort of course of an evening or a night. And so it's really hard to pin down exactly how height plays into collision dynamics. There are people out there I know of that are trying to sort of generate sensors that will go on windows so they can sort of pick up, did the bird hit the third floor versus the second floor, something like that. So I think there will be more information coming out about that. Um, Generally, people seem to think that birds are hitting windows higher up, but it's just unknown at this point. And then the directionality piece, again, I don't think people have really looked into that super deeply. It's something that I'm, looking at with my data. I do know that at certain buildings, so take, for example, the pedestrian bridge that crosses the Mississippi River. We see a lot of buildings on one side, or a lot of collisions on one side of the bridge, but not on the other side of the bridge. And so there might be something to, directionality of migrants or the way that the sun is hitting, the glass or something like that. So definitely something that we're considering and looking into.
There are a few more questions that popped up in chat. So this one is for Erin and Jolie. Summer asks, will you be using the Stop the Thud data before and after your Skyway installation to analyze the effectiveness?
I can jump in here a little bit. Andrew and I spoke yesterday about, collaborating in the future. So I'm not sure what that might look like, but Andrew had suggested that, learning about this project, he'll add Regis to the areas where he's got people checking for birds. so that we'll have a more accurate estimate of how effective it is. And I think that's great. I think that's a great example of collaboration. And maybe there will be more that'll come of it.
Yeah, I can
Wonderful.
jump in here
Oh,
for
sorry,
one
Andrew.
second. I just threw an image in the chat. But Regis has not been okay. So I'll take a step back. We have Stop the Thud. We have community members contributing reports from all over campus. There's no restrictions on where those can come from. On top of that, I do have a team of volunteers that goes out and does surveys around certain buildings on campus. Some that we know are collision culprits, some that we don't. It's just to get a little bit more of a scientific basis for some of the analyses that I'm doing. Regis has not been on my list of buildings that I have people survey. So all of the reports that we've had from Regis so far have been strictly those community reports. And we've only accumulated about 4 or 5 reports from Regis, all centered around that Skyway area. That isn't to say that it's not more of a collision hotspot. And I'm sure it is. And in fact, if you look at the map close to Regis, there are 2 skyways going into Carlson, one from Hanson Hall and one from the parking garage, and both are really big collision hotspots for us. And so I'm sure Regis is also a big collision hotspot along those sort of same lines. Anyways, what I'm looking forward to doing now is now that we have something in place at Regis, I'm going to add it to our sort of rotation of buildings to cover. And so I'll be going and just checking on that Skyway every time I do a sort of survey on West Bank and seeing what we can find in terms of birds that have collided or not with that skyway. And someone had said earlier, like, I don't know if any birds have collided yet. It's probably a little too early in the season for the migrants we really expect to see that would collide with buildings. So in the coming weeks, we should have more of a better sense of how effective that sort of mitigation is going to be.
Andrew, has anything been done on those other skyways, like other mitigation efforts tried?
Nope, not that I know of.
I wanted to jump in quickly. There was a question before about height and also questions about more recently in the chat about policy and for like new construction. And I actually have an example of that on the website that is linked to the website that I made, Kaleidoscape, which they sell things to apply to windows and such and have lots of really helpful information. There is a page about code compliance, and it really grabbed my eye because there was one for Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I am from. And there is a city ordinance regarding new buildings to be more bird safe. They have a number for height. I don't know if it's arbitrary. I haven't seen anything yet about why, but they did say that there is a heightened risk with windows below 60 feet, which is obviously a pretty big range, the first 60 feet. But there are definitely a lot of instances where things have been implemented with code in Illinois, California, Long Beach, New York. And so there definitely are possibilities for pushing for it. On the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website, there's like an email format that you can that it has like bird safe universities and campuses, and they have an email format to send to a university where it kind of preloads it for you. So there are definitely initiatives and resources about pushing those in leadership to think about it, because as Cassidy said, there's more funding going into rehab when we're having more injuries. And I had a whole class where we had a debate about whether or not rehabilitation is ethical. But there's obviously a lot of money that goes into it. And if we can get money put into preventative things, hopefully people with money in mind would realize that in the long term that would be financially beneficial. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of resources, and a lot of that can be found on the website, but there will be more eventually.
Thanks so much, Jolie. And I just wanted to add, so all of our new construction on campus must follow a set of standards called B3. If you're familiar with like LEED certification, there are some similarities, but it is something that is particular to the state of Minnesota. And there is a section in there on bird safety for buildings with new construction. I don't know if those standards are maybe as robust as we need them to be. But it is something that is in consideration, but I would love to see more there, definitely. Um, I do see that we do have that video from Chatsani in the chat. Chris, should we share that briefly?
Yeah, would you mind showing that?
Yeah, of
Chosani took
course.
this video and I was able to upload it in the chat. Sorry, I wasn't able to put it into the
No, that's
slideshow.
fine. I might have to download it and then find it in my files here. Let's see. Okay. Well, it's very sparkly and beautiful. I think we should do that to all of our skyways. It's very fun.
I encourage people to come over to Regis and just experience it. On a sunny day, it's really very sparkly and magical when it's sunny in particular.
Also,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add the resources that were listed on the previous slide are helpful too, especially that FLAP website that has a lot of mitigation and specific products that can be used. Because as important as it is to have building standards on a go forward basis, I mean, think about all the buildings that are already here. And so we have to try and figure out ways of addressing the mitigation efforts on the buildings that are here. So, you know, fingers crossed that this might be an avenue or at least might open some new ideas to things that can be done on the interior of buildings because especially skyways because that's so much more accessible and cost effective.
And I know we have summer here, and I believe the Bell Museum committed to that kind of fritted glass. Is that correct? Or maybe Andrew, you know as well.
Yes, they did. All the windows in the bell have some sort of fritted glass or some sort of visual obstruction, and they have that sort of deck too. And the glass railings on that deck also have patterning on them. So yeah, that's like probably the best example of bird safe glass on campus that I would sort of direct people to if they were to look at, a building that was constructed specifically with bird safe mitigation in mind.
Hooray for the bell.
Andrew, you had mentioned the Cancer and Cardiovascular Center that's the main sort of culprit. Do you know of the 1,600 collisions that you've recorded, how many have been there?
Yep, it's on my website here. Let's see if I can get to it. So 198 at the CCRB, Cancer and Cardiovascular Research Building. So that's our top. And number two is the stadium, actually, 122. So Huntington Bank Stadium. And that's like an interesting example because if you're walking at ground level, you would never really notice. It's a lot of brick. But there's these glass sort of boxes up top, and that's what's really causing the issue there.
Interesting. And you had mentioned when we spoke that the high cost, a lot of the exorbitant cost of it was in the scaffolding. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of how can we try and brainstorm about making these long-term mitigation efforts more affordable?
Yeah. So yeah, so we had identified that as our, top collision culprit. We had gotten in the room with the architects of the building, and they came up with this sort of plan to sort of implement, the patterning to the outside of the windows. A couple interesting things to note. One thing that they were concerned about that would have had no sort of idea that this would have been an issue was that installing patterning on the outside of the glass might have had an issue with voiding the warranty on the glass. So it was like an interesting thing to sort of consider there. But yeah, the cost that they sort of quoted to do the work was really expensive. And talking to folks after the fact, it seems like a lot of that cost wasn't in the actual, buying the application or the film itself, but was more of, blocking off the sideway and getting the sort of cranes and scaffolding needed to get folks up there to actually put stuff on the windows itself. So because of that whole thing and because of, yeah, how expensive it was going to be, I've started to think more and more about like how can we sort of find other ways to implement mitigations and like how good is good enough? Like is putting something up there that's maybe not 100% effective better than doing nothing at all? And so I'm really interested in seeing how this sort of Regis mitigation is going to work and if it's going to, completely prevent collisions, if it's going to prevent some collisions. If it prevents collisions fairly well, I mean, I think this is a really interesting sort of template to sort of think about and think about how we can sort of implement similar things on other skyways on campus. So thinking about those two skyways that are going to and from Carlson, like, can we do something similar? Maybe not the same, but an interesting way of breaking up that glass space as well. Um, I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to turn out and if this will be a way of sort of cost effectively finding a solution to stop some collisions on campus.
There was a question in the chat from John, asking about artistic opportunities with bird preventative art, bird strike preventative art, because I mentioned people running their hands through what we currently have up, in the past, and it's on the there is an effort many years ago that seems to have died out now, and no one seems to be manning the email, that was also going for preventing bird strikes. And they had an installation also on the Regis Skyway where they did paintings on the windows. When Erin and I first started this project, and how I am with almost every project is I dream wildly out of this world. And I have to definitely always tone my dreams back. So I had designs kind of sketched up for possible applications if we could do like a custom vinyl on the exterior. And so I think there's a lot of interactivity that there can be, whether I think Andrew, you said on the building in St. Paul was like maybe a contest to design that film with the forest scene. There's definitely I think a lot of ways to bring people in. I think that's the best way to do education, especially when it comes to the natural world. That is something that I'm passionate about. When I'm in my career, wherever I am, I want to work with animal ambassadors because I think having something really real in front of you, and that you can relate to, is the best way to get people to connect to things and actually care about them. And so I think if there was a way that we could engage the community, especially people who aren't already caring about it, to engage in potentially the solution. If that means doing another design like competition, or getting ideas from the community having people vote if we do get funding for a long-term exterior application solution, having people vote on the design if there are multiple that come up. I think engagement is like the second biggest, most important thing other than the actual solution, because it's what'll drive it.
I'll jump in here too, because I think we did have some other ideas, and then just the logistics of getting it up, they had to kind of fall by the wayside. But one of the things that we did as part of the project in class was we had people make the paper cranes um, as just a way of, spreading hope. And the idea, I think, of using art as a way to reach people in addition to live animals. I mean, those are probably two ways that you can touch people's hearts. And after lots of years of working on lots of initiatives on behalf of animals, I think reaching people in their hearts and is a way to motivate people. You can kind of talk and talk and talk, but if you can reach people at a deeper level, that's sometimes where you see more meaningful change. So the other idea that Jolie and I played around with, because we both love pigeons, is we were going to have like a little pigeon statue or something. We hadn't quite developed it all because we just moved on to other aspects of the project. But just to educate people about pigeons and kind of the plight of pigeons. And I had worked on a project years ago for that too. So there were other thoughts that we had, and probably more thoughts to come, in the future. But I guess I'll just end it there.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. I hate to cut off such an engaging conversation. I want to thank all of our speakers, Christine, Andrew, Jolie, Erin. This has really opened my eyes to some more creative solutions that we could consider. This issue of bird strikes is ongoing. It's not going anywhere. I unfortunately get far too many images of dead birds coming into my email inbox. It's something I care about personally, something here at the Office of Sustainability we care about. So we'll keep pushing for solutions to see if we can do more. And I think we definitely can. And this has really opened my eyes. So thank you all so much. This was really wonderful. The session was recorded and it will be up on our website in the next week or so.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a
Thank you
good
so
one,
much
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
for being here.